Well, the coronavirus lockdown has resulted in the fastest decline in carbon emissions ever recorded because of the falling global demand for transport and energy. Now the government is being urged to ensure that progress in tackling climate change continues once the epidemic is over. Our chief environment correspondent Justin Rolat reports.
And how about you, Lauren? I know you're working on Mark's announcement this morning.
Yes, doing lots of announcement things.
We're all getting used to new ways of working. Kelly Devine is a vice president of the credit card company MasterCard. Since lockdown, she's been working from home. With meetings moving online, there is no more 3-hour round trip to work every day, though she now has other challenges to contend with.
Oh, look, we've got some visitors. Hello, guys. How are you doing? You'll be surprised to hear they want some food. I think lots of people used to work from home 1 day a week, and it's hard to be good at something when you only do it 1 day a week. I think we've all become experts at working from home. So, companies will now have more productive employees when they do work from home, and therefore you can enable them to do that more often.
Today, Boris Johnson's advisors on climate change urged him to invest in making home working easier. They say any attempt to kickstart the economy has to help us all move towards lower carbon lifestyles.
This is a moment to unfreeze what was previously a set of things that were set in stone. So we are going to have to re-examine our priorities across the whole of the economy, and the government will have to lead us through the recovery phase. Let's make sure that we think about the climate priorities as we do that. These are sensible steps that will make the economy more resilient in the future, and that's something we should be thinking about right now.
The Committee on Climate Change says the government needs to invest to make homes more energy efficient, to decarbonise our transport and energy systems, and to retrain workers for a low-carbon world. The government told the BBC today it is working to ensure there will be a green and resilient recovery from COVID-19. Finland has enshrined the right to flexible working in law. One of its advisors says we can change the way we live and work too.
This situation, of course, forced us to change our behavior. And now I'm hoping that people could somehow think about their lives like more generally. If I was able to change my life this drastically, so in the future, I might be able to keep some of the good sides of this behavior change.
Lockdown has given us a glimpse of a cleaner, greener world, but we do need to get the economy going again. The challenge will be doing that in a way that locks in some of the low-carbon habits we have all been learning. Justin Rolat, BBC News, London.
Well, can those cleaner skies persist? Let's ask someone with huge experience in this field. Professor Sir David King was the UK's Chief Scientific Advisor from 2000 to 2007 and the government's Permanent Special Representative for Climate Change from 2013 to 2017. I'm pleased to say he joins me this afternoon. A very good afternoon to you, Sir David.
Good afternoon.
Well, these are very, very big questions. It's fantastic that there has been something positive emerging from lockdown, but how much optimism do you have that we can grasp this in a societal way and that our ways might change for the better in relation to the climate?
I think, Jane, the two previous reports, both from the Mayor of London and the report on the need for change, indicate that we are really fortunate in one sense in having this pandemic. We know the world as a whole is faced with two global challenges, and one of these is an existential threat, that is climate change, to our global civilization. The other one, this virus, has shut down global economies and is causing very significant fatalities. So as we move forward, we know these two are connected by several factors. There is, of course, a major difference. Humanity will survive the pandemic, but they are both challenges which recognize no borders, and they are challenges where the scientific community over the past many decades has provided detailed progressive analyses for warning governments of the risks and setting out clear programs for action. In both cases, I would have to say the follow-through by governments has mostly been inadequate. The British government has been one of the leaders in this area. But of course, there's another overall driver for global paradigm change, which is what we're looking at, which is the growing world population. It's scheduled to rise to 10 billion by 11 billion by the end of the century. And this is coupled to a very welcome, massive increase in the global middle class. From 1 billion in the year 2000, we're well over 3 billion today. Carries with it an enormous increase in the demand for natural resources such as land, minerals, food, including livestock, cotton, steel, and on public well-being and health. It also delivers an increased rate of greenhouse gas emissions, but also, in addition to that, pollutants, waste, environmental pollution, loss of biodiversity. We are in the process of seeing our ecosystems unwinding, and we depend on them for our survival.
OK, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because I mean you articulate the challenges and the scenario very clearly, but I'm interested in whether you feel, because you talked about some government responses being inadequate, I'm interested whether you feel this extraordinary drop in greenhouse gas emissions that we have seen can where will that go? Because by definition, once economies do start coming out of lockdown, once job creation begins again, we know the impact that has on our climate. Can we, as a result of what we've been through in many countries, find a balance after lockdown?
I think we will. I mean, I think that I have a sense of optimism about this. We're all learning just how well we can live, or many of us are learning how well we can live from our homes. We're learning how to use Zoom and Skype and all of these mechanisms for keeping in touch. I'm having conversations with people around the world in a way that previously I would have had to travel to those countries to have those conversations. All of that is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I think the air industry will never recover to the levels it's been at recently. That does mean that we will see various areas of income generation, particularly around travel, being diminished. But in terms of the current lockdown, it affords us, as has been suggested, a glimpse of an alternative paradigm. And that is focused on the well-being of all people and on the well-being of our ecosystems.
And so, forgive me, you mentioned aviation, and that's interesting because we've talked about that so much, and we know there are thousands and thousands of jobs at stake. The economic impact of that is enormous, but of course the flip side being that has a positive impact for the environment. I mean, are you in the camp where you say we have to see this as an opportunity? The jobs that have been lost there have to be created in other ways, in green energy, for example?
Absolutely. So what we have been focusing on too slowly is the way we invest in infrastructure for the future. As Mark Carney has been saying frequently since 2015, we must cut back to zero on infrastructure for the future, building it today, which is high carbon. Right? So focusing on all of those things also means reducing the amount of travel. We know that we can get to electric vehicles. We know we can produce electricity without using coal, gas or oil. We know that we can make that future happen, but we will be looking at this massive rise in global population. And so we will never be able to return safely to the former mode of living. I think the previous century got us into thinking around the business of every country focusing on military hardware, military expenditure. We are spending a lot of money on renewing nuclear weapons here in the United States as well. Military power and economic dominance play no role in either climate change or in managing a pandemic. The new 21st century approach has to be different. That's the full paradigm shift that I believe we may be setting in place right now.
Right, and that is fascinating from your perspective and with your wealth of experience in that area. While you are with us, may I, on coronavirus specifically, ask you about testing, because you will know, I'm sure, that the Health Secretary has again today been defending the government's strategy. We heard Boris Johnson in the Commons talking about trying to increase the capacity again for testing. He was talking about lab capacity, but he was talking about 200,000 lab capacity by the end of May. What is your assessment of of testing where we are today?
Where we are today, compared with where we should have been, is in a very poor state. I don't think we can duck the issue that we only got into this in any sort of serious way late in March. And what did the government do to prepare ourselves for more testing back on January the 23rd, when we had all of the information about the new virus from China? What did we do to start preparing ourselves when we had run down our capacity in our National Health Service? We had months to do that. We're looking at the comparison with Germany, but my best comparison in Europe is with Greece. The Greek economy nowhere near as strong as ours. The National Health Service there nowhere near as strong as ours. But nevertheless, in Greece, starting 3rd of March, they began the lockdown process. Greece's deaths per head of population, let me make that comparison absolute, per head of population is the only way to look at this, is a tiny fraction of ours, like 250, and they are now able, from May the 4th, to begin emerging from the lockdown process. What they did is everything right. They set up all the testing they had to do. They brought in all the PPE they knew they would need, and they brought in all the masks. So the population, as they go out of lockdown, will be required, as they go shopping and everything, to wear face masks. So I think we have fared extremely badly.
And is it too late? Is it possible to catch up, or is it scientifically, is it simply too late? Is it worthwhile talking about having that capacity of 200,000 in labs by the end of May?
It is, of course, worthwhile, but I want to hear, what is the program? Is the program, testing is for what purpose? It is for two purposes. One is to tell us to what extent this epidemic has penetrated around the country, but it also serves a purpose of finding out every new case of somebody going down with the virus and tracing every contact that person had in the previous 2 weeks, getting hold of those contacts, as they've been doing in Greece since the 3rd of March, getting hold of those contacts and making sure they are isolated. Now, if you do that, you can bring it all to a halt. I haven't heard a word about why we need such testing. If the alternative, which is, of course, our worry, is that we're heading towards herd immunity, and that is maybe government policy, we haven't heard that clearly, then what the testing would be doing is testing to see what proportion of us have actually had the COVID virus and are therefore likely to be immune. That is an important number if you're hoping to achieve immunity amongst a big enough proportion of the population that the virus can't take hold again.
And that's really interesting. I mean, do you think that herd immunity is a policy, but it's not being talked about?
I'm afraid it does look as if it might be. I would seriously like to ask that question of government ministers. What is the policy? Is it to manage the epidemic so the National Health Service can manage the number of people who need hospital beds? Or is it to overwhelm the virus and drive us into a state where we no longer have the epidemic quickly? Now, if I'm looking at economic recovery, there are two things that match together. One is get out of the pandemic as quickly as possible, and the other is with the fewest possible deaths. And to answer your question, we can introduce policies to take us down that road quickly today. But we have to really focus on every detail. And one aspect of having the Mayor of London on board is very important. To what extent is the government engaging with mayors around the country, with local authorities, using the knowledge of their authorities to make sure that as we emerge from this lockdown, we don't see that second spike? And let me just say, a second spike is going to take us back to square one. It means we go into lockdown again, and we go into lockdown for longer. And that would be bad for our economy and also bad for the number of fatalities.
And just before I let you go, Sir David, may I just ask you your thoughts about Neil Ferguson's resignation? Is it a big loss?
I think Neil Ferguson is a top epidemiologist. If I were in Sir Patrick's position, I would replace him. There are other epidemiologists in his own team and in our university sector. We are very strong in that area. I think we also need to see what is going to happen in terms of getting perhaps a better balance on the SAGE committee, by which I mean, for example, we don't see too many people from the engineering and manufacturing sector. Are we going to see that we have all the manufacturing capability for the PPE for the rest of the period, for the masks we need, and especially create the manufacturing capacity for vaccines for whenever they are developed anywhere in the world, so that we can have a sovereign vaccine development factory?
Very good of you to give us so much time. Thanks very much for your insights this afternoon. Thank you very much. Professor Sir David King there, thank you for your time.